In a world that measures existence through visibility, silence becomes an act of resistance. Scroll long enough and you'll notice them. Those profiles without faces, those names that never post. No updates, no filters, no carefully staged smiles. They appear like ghosts passing through the algorithm, watching yet unseen. And strangely, they seem freer than the rest of us. Alan Watts once said, "You're under no obligation to be anyone other than yourself." But in our modern theater of validation, we perform the self until we forget the actor behind it. Every post becomes a small prayer for recognition. See me, remember me, approve me. And every like feels like proof that we exist. But what if some souls no longer need that proof? What if those who don't post their photos have simply awakened from the trance of attention? They haven't withdrawn out of fear, they've stepped back out of clarity. Because the digital world is not merely a network, it's a mirror, and mirrors can seduce us into mistaking reflection for reality. The psychology of silence is rarely understood because it doesn't shout its reasons. It doesn't justify itself with captions or reels. It just watches, and in that quiet watching, something ancient returns. A sense of being that doesn't depend on being seen. People who remain invisible online are not running away from life. They're walking toward it without the burden of constant display. Their restraint is not emptiness, it's a kind of wisdom. The wisdom that knows that some experiences lose their soul the moment they are shared. So today we're not just analyzing behavior. We're exploring the deep river beneath it. The current of awareness that Alan Watts spoke of, where the self is not a photograph, not a projection, but a flow of consciousness. Let us enter that silence and see what lives there. Part 1. The illusion of visibility. The first illusion of the digital age is that visibility equals existence. If the world doesn't see you, the world forgets you. But Alan Watts would smile and say, "The real you is not who you think you are, and perhaps not who you post you are either." Each photo we upload is a fragment of identity, trimmed and filtered to fit expectations. We call it authenticity, but even authenticity has become a brand, a carefully rehearsed naturalness, an edited spontaneity. And the tragedy is that the more we reveal, the less we feel, because the act of constant sharing creates a subtle anxiety, a need to maintain the image that others now believe to be us. Those who don't post have escaped this psychological trap. They no longer feed the performance of selfhood. They've realized that the moment you start to curate your being, you begin to serve the very image you created. You become a custodian of your own mask. The ego, Watts explained, is a convenient fiction, a name tag on the infinite. But when that fiction becomes public property, when it's stamped onto every screen, the distance between the inner and outer self widens, and the soul which longs for wholeness quietly rebels. The silent ones sense this instinctively. They don't measure their worth by engagement metrics. Their satisfaction arises from inner coherence, not outer applause. They live not to be liked, but to be real. And in a culture obsessed with expression, their refusal to perform becomes the loudest statement of all. Imagine two people walking through a garden. One photographs every flower to prove they were there. The other closes their eyes and smells the air. Both have witnessed beauty, but only one has experienced it. Those who don't post have chosen the scent over the snapshot. They understand that visibility can be a form of vanity, that being unseen is sometimes the only way to truly see. In their invisibility lies a radical act of self-possession, to belong to oneself completely, even when no one is watching. Part 2. The psychology of silence. Silence on social media isn't always shyness. It can be psychological spaciousness, an ability to breathe in a crowded room. Modern culture confuses noise with relevance, but quiet minds know another truth, that wisdom often hides in what's not said. Alan Watts described the self as a pattern in a stream, not a solid thing. To post constantly is to freeze that stream into snapshots, to pretend that the moving water can be captured by pixels. But those who remain silent let the river flow unobserved. They live their moments instead of documenting them. Psychologically, such individuals often exhibit what therapists call self-differentiation, the capacity to maintain one's sense of identity without merging with the crowd. They can exist without external confirmation. Their emotional world doesn't depend on virtual applause. This doesn't mean they dislike people. In fact, many of them love deeply but quietly. Their relationships are private sanctuaries. not public exhibitions. They value connection over impression, presence over proof. And this reveals something profound about their inner structure. They draw energy from meaning, not from measurement. In a society that rewards visibility, staying invisible demands courage. It means risking misunderstanding. It means allowing others to fill the silence with their own projections. But the silent ones accept this risk. They know that misunderstanding is lighter to carry than self-betrayal. Watts often joked that we spend our lives playing roles, and the hardest role to drop is the one we play for ourselves. Those who avoid posting have stopped rehearsing. They've stepped off the stage, letting the masks fall into the dust. What remains is something raw, unadvertised, profoundly human. If you listen closely, their silence hums with awareness. It says, "I exist beyond the feed. I am not a collection of images, but the space between them." It is the same silence you feel in a forest at dawn, when the trees stand perfectly still yet seem more alive than ever. In psychological terms, this silence nurtures integration, the alignment of thought, emotion, and action. Instead of chasing fragmented approval, they cultivate a continuous presence within themselves. Their happiness is self-generated, not crowdsourced. Alan Watts would likely call them unadvertised sages. They move quietly through the digital storm, touching the world without announcing every touch. Their stillness is not absence, but awareness. Their privacy not withdrawal, but freedom. And so, when you meet someone who doesn't post, don't mistake them for indifferent. Look deeper. You might be seeing the rarest thing left in the modern world. A person who has nothing to prove because they finally remember who they are. Part 3. The Mirror and the Mask. Every time we post online, we step in front of a mirror. But unlike a true mirror, this one reflects not who we are, but who we wish to be seen as. And the tragedy of our age is that most of us start to believe the reflection. Alan Watts often spoke about the play of life. He said the word person comes from the Latin persona, meaning mask. It was the mask actors wore in ancient theater to amplify their voice. So by definition, to be a person is to play a role. But social media didn't just give us masks, it gave us infinite stages to wear them on. We begin innocently enough, posting moments, sharing thoughts. But soon we start curating ourselves. We filter our faces, rewrite our captions, and measure our worth by numbers glowing on a screen. And as that digital mask grows prettier, the living face behind it begins to fade. Those who don't post have sensed this quiet erosion. They've noticed how identity hardens when constantly displayed, how every image becomes a small contract with public perception. Each like adds weight to the persona, and the self becomes a performer, trapped inside its own applause. To stop posting for them is not an act of disappearance, it's an act of remembrance. To remember that being is not branding, that your worth isn't measured in algorithms, and that you are not the echo others hear of you. Watts once said, "When you get rid of the ego, you're still you, but a more genuine you." The ones who don't post are not rejecting the world. They're rejecting illusion. They are shedding the symbolic skin of the online self to breathe in authenticity again. In psychological terms, they've rebalanced the relationship between persona and shadow, the conscious mask and the hidden truth beneath it. Most people feed only the mask, starving the soul, but the silent ones feed the inner life, nourishing the unseen with contemplation, art, and solitude. They understand that the truest transformations happen privately, that not every rebirth needs a witness, and when they do choose to reveal themselves, it is not a performance, it is a confession of being. Part 4. The Freedom of Invisibility. Freedom is a strange thing in the modern world. We think we are free because we can say, post, and show anything. But Alan Watts would smile gently and ask, "Are you expressing yourself or are you advertising yourself?" You see, expression born from ego binds you, because it depends on others to validate your sense of meaning. But expression born from awareness liberates you, because it asks for nothing in return. Those who refrain from posting have discovered this quiet freedom. Their invisibility is not a prison, it's a sanctuary. They've stepped outside the competition of visibility. The endless race to prove one's life is interesting enough to be noticed. To be unseen in a world obsessed with eyes is to reclaim the ancient art of mystery. They walk through the digital city like monks through a market, present, aware, but untouched by the noise. And in their absence, they become more real than those constantly performing. Psychologists call this state internal validation, the capacity to derive worth from within rather than from feedback. When you no longer depend on likes, you begin to hear your own heartbeat again. When you stop performing, you start participating in the raw immediacy of life. The invisible ones often see life more vividly. A quiet morning, a conversation, a breeze. These are not content for them, but communion. They feel deeply because they're not distracted by the need to document every feeling. Their awareness flows freely, unbroken by the impulse to prove. Alan Watts described enlightenment as the realization that you are not a separate ego. Those who don't post live closer to this truth. They understand that showing less of themselves does not make them smaller. It makes them whole. Their silence is a form of spiritual minimalism, removing the unnecessary until only truth remains. And that truth is simple. You are enough even when unseen. You are complete even without an audience. You exist even when no one is watching. Part 5. The inner audience. There's another kind of audience that most people forget about. It's not the one that scrolls your feed. It's the one that lives inside your mind. This audience never sleeps. It comments on everything you do, judges how you appear, and compares you to others even when you're alone. Alan Watts called this the social echo inside the self, a voice we inherit from the world, a reflection of others that becomes our inner critic. Social media amplifies this echo to deafening levels, because every post, every like, every comment feeds the illusion that we are constantly being watched. But those who don't post have learned to silence that inner audience. They have stepped backstage and closed the curtains, not because they hate the crowd, but because they no longer need applause to feel alive. Their self-worth no longer performs for an imaginary observer. They have stopped watching themselves live. Psychologically, this represents ego transcendence, the point where identity shifts from external reference to internal awareness. In this state, a person acts not to impress, but to express what naturally flows from being alive. Their energy is no longer wasted on maintenance of image, so it returns inward, fueling creativity, clarity, and calm. Watts would describe it as becoming transparent to yourself. You stop holding the spotlight, and instead allow life to shine through you effortlessly. Invisibility in this way becomes luminosity, a paradox of being unseen yet deeply radiant within. When such people speak, it's deliberate. When they act, it's authentic. And when they stay silent, their silence has gravity, a stillness that invites reflection in others, because true silence doesn't beg to be understood. It simply exists as truth too vast for words. Their psychology is not that of detachment, but of liberation from unnecessary noise. They've mastered the rare ability to exist without exhibition, to live without leaving a trace, and yet, their presence is felt more deeply than those shouting into the void. So when you encounter someone who rarely posts, understand, you're in the company of someone who has turned inward, someone who has stopped seeking mirrors, because they've already met the one audience that truly matters, their own soul. Part 6. The paradox of connection. We call it social media, but rarely does it make us feel more connected. Scroll through endless photos of faces smiling at parties and notice the irony. The loneliest people are often the ones most desperate to be seen. Connection has become a performance, and authenticity, a marketing strategy. Alan Watts once said that our constant effort to define and secure ourselves is the very thing that makes us feel separate. In trying to prove we belong, we reinforce the illusion of isolation, because to prove something is to doubt it, and the one who needs to prove connection is already haunted by the fear of disconnection. Those who don't post often understand this paradox intuitively. Their relationships exist beyond display. They don't measure affection through likes, nor friendship through public acknowledgement. To them, intimacy is sacred precisely because it's unseen. Their silence is a boundary of respect, a refusal to turn love into content, or grief into performance. They grasp that when everything becomes public, nothing remains personal. Psychologically, this reflects secure attachment, the ability to connect deeply without needing constant reassurance. They are present in moments rather than observers of them. When they laugh with a friend, they don't need to record it. When they watch a sunset, they don't reach for their phone. Because they understand that the most beautiful experiences can only be felt, never captured. Watts often spoke of the dance of life. He said that to dance well, you must forget yourself, to be absorbed in the music without worrying about the steps. Those who stay silent online are still dancing, just not for an audience. Their rhythm is inward, their music unshared yet eternal. In a world obsessed with exposure, they've rediscovered the sweetness of privacy. And perhaps that is the most radical act left. To live a full, vivid, meaningful life without needing to make it visible. Part 7. The inner stillness. The psychology of those who don't post often leads to one thing modern culture rarely values: stillness. Stillness is not idleness, it's depth. It's the mind returning to its natural clarity after the turbulence of comparison and noise. Alan Watts describes stillness as the mirror of being. When you stop moving, you start to see not just the world, but the patterns of your own mind. And when you stop showing, you start knowing yourself beyond the images you once defended. For the constantly posting mind, silence feels like absence. But for the aware mind, silence is presence amplified. It's the point where you realize that nothing was ever missing. You were simply too loud to hear it. Those who embrace this stillness begin to perceive differently. They start noticing subtle things: the sound of their own breath, the rhythm of rain against the window, the small changes in light between morning and dusk. And through this attention, life regains its sacredness. This is not withdrawal, it's awakening. In stepping away from the noise of social validation, they rediscover direct experience. Psychologically, this marks a shift from external stimulation to internal integration. The nervous system calms. Anxiety fades. The mind, once addicted to reaction, learns to rest in observation. Alan Watts would say they've remembered the game, that the purpose of life was never to win, but to play beautifully. The silent ones have simply stopped keeping score. They dance not to impress, but because the dance itself is joy. And when you meet them, you'll notice something unusual about their presence. It's not that they demand attention, it's that they don't. They radiate a kind of peaceful gravity, as if their silence carries the weight of understanding. You sense that they've already made peace with the one person most of us spend our lives trying to impress: ourselves. Ending. The beauty of the unposted life. Maybe Alan Watts was right when he said, "You are an aperture through which the universe looks at itself." If that's true, then every act of silence is the universe resting. Every moment unshared is still complete, and every unseen soul contributes to the quiet balance of the world. The ones who don't post remind us of something sacred. That being doesn't need broadcasting. That meaning isn't measured in metrics. That there is still dignity in the private, still wonder in the invisible. They are not missing out. They are tuning into life as it truly is, raw, impermanent, and beautifully fleeting. They understand that no photograph can contain the pulse of experience. No caption can hold the truth of a feeling. To live deeply, one must sometimes disappear. So the next time you notice a quiet profile, a name without a face, a presence without performance, don't assume emptiness. You may be glimpsing a different kind of fullness. The fullness of someone who has stopped needing to appear in order to exist. In their quiet way, they are teaching us the final lesson of the self. That freedom is not in showing the world who you are, but in forgetting to care who the world thinks you are. Because when you let go of the need to be seen, you finally begin to see. And in that seeing, you discover what Alan Watts tried to tell us all along. That the truest life is not lived for the crowd. It is lived for the soul watching behind your eyes.